In this demonstration, we are going to understand about Docker Compose and how do you use Docker Compose to deploy multi-container deployment. Now, Composer is actually a tool which is used for defining and running multiple Docker container applications. With Compose, you can actually use a YAML file to deploy your own application services with necessary configuration. Then, with a single command, you can actually create an entire cluster of your own resources with the required configuration for the services. Now, as I said, Docker Compose is something which is very important when we are working in a containerized environment to build an application stack. Now, these application stacks can be built in different environments, for example, for production, staging, development, testing, as well as you can also use this Docker Compose when you are building a CI/CD flow in your DevOps. Now, the first thing that we need to do when we are doing Docker Compose are 3 steps. First is defining your app's environment with a Docker file so it can be reproduced anywhere in any system. It can be production, staging, or development. And that's what you are seeing here. Now, if you can see, there is a docker compose.yaml file, which is your Docker file with all your app environment. This configuration file tells how my app has to behave, what is the configuration of my app. Once you define this, then you need to define the services that will actually make up your Docker, so they can run together in an isolated environment. And now you can observe that this is my Docker Compose file. Now we are going to run the Docker Compose file and start and see the entire app working. Now let us get more details into the Docker Compose configuration file, how it looks like. So it starts with version 3.3. Now there are several versions of Docker Compose file format. The current one and the latest one is 3.3. Okay, the Compose is a YAML file where you define different services, volumes, and any other necessary configuration. It can be a networking configuration too. Now let us go ahead and see the Docker Compose in action. Now you can see the service is Spring People DB, and I'm going to use MySQL 5.7, and this is the command that I'm going to run on the startup. And MySQL database name is DB, user is user, password is password, and the root password that I'm confirming. Then the port that it is going to be exposed on 3306, and this is where it is going to have the database and the volume that is running. Now, one beauty with Docker Compose is you can run a single container or you can run a stack of containers with your own configuration. So let us start with a single container. So I'm going to go into the lab, single container lab, and into this folder, and I can see a Docker Compose. The same file that I have shown you here in my editor, I'm just showing it here. Now let me go ahead and run a single container and see. Now I'm going to run Docker Compose up -d. -d is your detach mode. And if you remember, in our previous classes we have used command Docker, but here we are using Docker Compose. Now as soon as I type Docker Compose up -d, it is going to pick up the Docker Compose file that is there in this own file. So for example, if you are looking at the present working directory, it's home Spring People labs single container. That means it is going to pick up the container configuration file from wherever the command is run. So if I'm running the command from this position, it is going to actually pick up the file that is there in this folder. So Docker Compose up -d. Now what is it doing? It is actually going ahead and downloading the MySQL 5.7 image. So let's wait for the image to get downloaded. And the beauty with Docker Compose is you can configure your n number of environmental variables as per your requirement. Now let's wait for it to pull it and extract and then run it. Now this will actually help us to get it done. Now, if you observe, the Docker actually has created a container. Let us go ahead and see. There are two ways that you can use. One is a Docker Compose ps-a, which will actually show you the running container. And you can observe that there is a container which is running with this name. And the container entry point is this. That's the definition. The state is up. And you can see the ports. 3306 is the port that it got exposed. However, you can also type Docker Compose ps, which will actually, okay, that was a typo. I can go ahead and use Docker Compose ps-a. Again, I can use Docker Compose ps. However, I can also type Docker ps and Docker ps-a. Pretty much this, all the commands are actually going to give you all the information that is required for you to see the Docker container status. I hope that was clear. Now we saw how to do that with a Docker single container in a Docker Compose file, and you can see I have only one container. Now let us go ahead and clear all the required containers and see how do I run a multi-container deployment. So before I go for the multi-container deployment using Docker Compose, I'll go ahead and delete the existing containers so that it is clear for us. So how do I stop? Yes, you can use Docker Compose down. So what it will do, it will pick up the Docker Compose configuration file, whichever the container is there, it's going to actually go ahead and stop. And now you can see Docker ps-a and Docker ps, that is down. It has actually deleted the container itself. So the Docker Compose down will actually bring everything down. And let us see the images that I have. I have a Docker image MySQL. Now let's go ahead and understand how do I work with a multi-container. Now if I see, I'll show you a different file here. If you can see, I have a service with 3.3 and the services are two services. I have a DB service, I have a WordPress service. Now this DB service image that I'm going to use is MySQL 5.7 and the volume and the environmental files. Similarly, I can also define another service with a different image and different environmental variable files. Now let us go ahead and run the double container and see how it behaves. So I'm just going to the double container folder, which will actually have my Docker Compose. So if I look at my Docker Compose, this is the Docker Compose file that I have. Let us go ahead and run. So Docker Compose app-d. Now what it will do is, it will go ahead and pull all the containers that are required. So if you observe, previously I have downloaded MySQL because I was running a MySQL container. Now I am going to run a WordPress container also. So it is taking a bit of time for it to go ahead and download the WordPress and then run it. So it is currently downloading and extracting it. Let's wait for the entire process to complete. Now the download is completed. It is actually creating the containers itself. Now let us type Docker ps to see I have a container. Yes, I can see there are two running containers. Let me decrease the font to make it clear. Now I can also use Docker ps-a, then Docker Compose ps-a, and I can also type Docker ps, which will accordingly show you. As we were discussing previously, ps-a will actually show you all the containers that are running and not running, and ps will only show you the running containers. Now this is how you are actually going to create a multi-container deployment using a Docker Compose. Now what if I have to make them delete? and you can see the two images. I can go ahead and actually do a Docker compose down, which will actually bring down everything. So all the two containers will go down, as well as the container configuration gets deleted and the container is clear. So you can observe here, I don't have anything. Now it's clear. So Docker compose down will actually bring everything down. So that's all for this demo, and this is how you're actually going to manage your Docker containers when you want to have a application stack built using Compose. Looking forward to see you in the next demo, and I would request you to go ahead and practice as many times as possible to get a hang of how it works.